This is a Supreme Court case, Engle V. Vitale, 1962. Stephen Engle was a parent of one of the students in the school who challenged the state-sponsored prayer in New York public schools, arguing that it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. William Vitale was the president of the Board of Education in this case, and the New York State Board of Regents authorized a voluntary prayer recited in the school. The students were encouraged to recite the prayer in school even though it was voluntary, and since it was voluntary, the court ruled it didn't violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The issue was if the recitation of a prayer in public school violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which it did. The arguments for the petitioner was that there was a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Even though it was voluntary, students were still pressured to participate. There was separation between church and state, and since it was a public school, it was affiliated to them. A precedent cited was the case McCollum v. Board of Education. The argument the respondents made was that it was acceptable to use in public schools because it was non-denominational and due to the fact that since no students were actually forced to recite the prayer, it didn't end up violating the Establishment Clause. The court ruled in a 6-1 in favor of the objecting parents. The court ruled the school-sponsored prayer was unconstitutional because it violated the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government from establishing an official religion. The Supreme Court's decision reinforced the separation of church and state by ruling that government-directed prayer in public schools is constitutional. The decision set a precedent for future cases involving the Establishment Clause and had an effect on religious activities in public schools going forward. A companion case is McCollum v. Board of Education. The court ruled that religious instruction in public schools, even if voluntarily, are unconstitutional. The court said a public school violated the Establishment Clause when it allowed the school to teach religious instruction during school hours and on school property. The court ended up ruling in an 8-1 decision that this violated the Establishment Clause by establishing a government preference for certain religions. Lastly, one dissenting opinion was Justice Stewart. He argued that the prayer was voluntary and that students had the option to say it or not. He felt that prohibiting the prayer was an overreach and that it denied students the opportunity to participate in tradition of America's public education.
The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment states that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, unquote. Since 1962, one way the clause has been applied is that no public school is allowed to have official school prayers. This is the result of the United States Supreme Court case Engle v. Vitale. In the early 1950s, the New York Board of Regents recommended to all local school boards that classes begin each day by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and a prayer. The prayer went, quote, Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country, unquote. In 1958, the Board of Education in Nassau County, led by William Vitale, instructed all public school teachers to begin every school day by having their classes say the Regent's Prayer out loud. Stephen Engle and a number of other parents with children in the local schools sued, demanding that the school district discontinue this practice. They argued that the school prayer violated the First Amendment as made applicable to the states by the 14th Amendment. The prayer, they argued, was composed by government officials as part of a government program to increase religious beliefs, and thus breached the constitutional wall of separation between church and state. The Regents argued that their prayer program didn't violate the Establishment Clause because the prayer was non-denominational, and students were permitted to remain silent or to leave the room while it was being said. The trial court held that the prayer was constitutional because no student was compelled to participate in it. The Court of Appeals of New York affirmed. The United States Supreme Court granted certiorari.